So thank you, Sophia, for organising this presentation and allowing me to talk about my research on dimethyltryptamine, DMT. I'm going to split this presentation up into three separate parts. First, an introduction to endogenous DMT and my personal history of experiencing altered states while being ill. The second part will briefly look at my critical review article of EEG band waves while under the influence of DMT or ayahuasca, and how this compares to EEG band waves from schizophrenic patients. The third part covers some other areas of research I have come across and how I think it will all fit together in producing endogenous DMT. Then there should be time left for questions or a chat about any ideas that you have. I'm just going to read the introduction to DMT from my published article, just in case you would like to follow up any references. So endogenous dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, is a naturally occurring compound in plants, animals, and humans. It is believed to help in the neuroprotection of cell death by using antioxidant properties which are involved in suppressing the apoptosis mechanism, which is controlled cell destruction. The entheogenic tea, ayahuasca, contains DMT, which produces hallucinations unlike any other psychedelic drug. During schizophrenia, people have been known to experience realistic alternative realities, which have the same kind of images seen with exogenous DMT. So, as some of you may know, ayahuasca and DMT create weird visions. My research on endogenous DMT has historical links based upon personal experiences. Although I was quite sick as a child, by the time I reached my late teens, early 20s, I was experiencing hypersomnia and migraines on a regular basis. By the time I was in my 30s, the pattern of illness was presenting every 2 weeks, with up to 3 days of migraines and excessive sleeping, which is called hypersomnia. During this time, I experienced a number of intense dreams, realities, and alternative consciousness. Interestingly, during one of these sessions, I was entangled in a vine that grabbed my hands so I could not escape. This was such a prominent, intense, realistic dream that I instinctively knew it had great meaning. But although I did not know the meaning, I eventually had it tattooed onto my hands. So it was many years after that I came across Jeremy Narby's book, The Cosmic Serpent, in which he spoke about the Shipibo tribe in the Amazon that drank ayahuasca tea. Ayahuasca, which contains DMT, is also known as the vine of the soul. As I read the book, I realized that what I was experiencing was something akin to taking ayahuasca in its natural form. I had never heard of endogenous DMT, and I was intrigued why I would have the vines on my hands. So I set off on a mission to find out what was happening biologically, even though I had no formal qualifications. So I learned as many different areas as I could, including the immune system, how the senses work, cell biology, and the neuroscience of mental health. So suggesting DMT is linked to hallucinations or schizophrenia, etc., is not really a new concept. The early work really focused on endogenous DMT being the culprit for hallucinations. Monitoring of DMT in urine of schizophrenic patients frustratingly led to inconsistent results, which I believe could have potential for reinvestigating, as now we have new technology to help us decipher why this may be happening. More recent work regarding endogenous DMT has been investigated by researchers such as Barker. This has tended to focus on biological pathways linking endogenous DMT to some of the existing known receptors stimulated by known hallucinogens. So I'm going to cover some research I've done. This research was part of my master's degree, so I had limited time and resources in which to investigate endogenous DMT and hallucinations. Although I really wanted to research the biological chemicals involved during hypersomnia, I ended up investigating EEG bandwaves of ayahuasca and DMT while comparing these to schizophrenic patients' EEG, as this was the information that was available in the timescale that I had. So this is a partial reproduction of the results table in my research article. The blue upward arrows indicate a rise in EEG bandwaves from baseline, while the orange downward arrows represent the opposite. Remember that EEG only measures changes in bandwaves and not the specific chemicals that are produced in the brain after administration of DMT or ayahuasca. So this is only a neural correlation. We can see that if pure DMT injection is used as a baseline for the EEG comparison, that there are some similarities connected to the EEG bandwave in schizophrenic patients. These were increases at the lower end of the bandwaves in the delta and theta ranges. In parallel to this were the ayahuasca ingestion EEG bandwaves, which decreased in theta and delta bandwaves. So although these results are from a very limited availability of research papers, it did enable me to question why the results would be as such. I was aware that in one of the papers reviewed, the ayahuasca plant included was known for high content 5-methoxy DMT and was not a standard DMT plant. Also, the addition of monoamine oxidase inhibitor plants to the ayahuasca contain beta-carbolines, which have also been known to be psychoactive and may be affecting results. As I stated in my research article, it would be good to run a more controlled investigation on this, and if feasible, use radio-tagged ligands to actually measure endogenous DMT. I don't want to spend too much time on this, as I'm eager to move on to how DMT may be connected to hallucinations and altered realities. So I would now like to share with you some of the research I've come across, and I would like to explain to you why I think naturally occurring DMT is a psychoactive chemical that creates hallucinations. I will try not to get too technical with the biological and chemistry of it, as I don't want to scare you all off, but I just want to give you a taster of how I think everything is entwined. So I'm not confessing that I've found all the answers as to whether DMT is creating hallucinations. All I can do is use isolated information from different research and link it together. So this is a depiction of what I believe to be the bigger picture. I will explain what I've found in each area in more detail in later slides. Although some of you may have come across the genetic components of schizophrenia, I would like to link metabolism to this. The tryptophan pathway is interesting, as it is connected to tryptamine psychedelics, while the kynurenine pathway is a branch of the tryptophan pathway, which can result in toxicity if not kept in balance. I've included diet in my bigger picture, purely because of the personal experience, and hence the research, of how changes to my diet have affected my health. And finally, I have added bacteria, as this is a novel research that is gaining momentum, and I found information that connects the diet to specific bacteria. So the first step of my bigger picture is genetics. I've noticed that there are genes which can affect the monoamine oxidase enzyme. This is interesting due to the connection between the ayahuasca combination of MAOI and DMT metabolism. You may have heard of the warrior gene that is connected to the metabolism or production of monoamine oxidase, causing changes to people's perception with aggressive behaviour. Although this gene is not a known link to production of hallucinations, there is in fact other genetic components linked to monoamine oxidase regulation, which is connected to MAOA gene variants linking schizophrenic phenotypes. This suggests to me that a genetic component can affect monoamine oxidase regulation, and this may have the ability, like ayahuasca combinations, to stimulate endogenous DMT when the cells are under oxidative stress. So I'm now going to move on to the metabolism area of research I've been doing. Interestingly, I found I had a slow metabolizer variant when I ran my raw genetic data RS number for CYP2D6, which may be a coincidence in pulling this all together. P450s are cytochrome enzymes that are found mainly in the liver, as these enzymes are responsible for metabolizing compounds such as pharmaceutical drugs and toxins. There are various cytochromes involved with drug metabolism, and the genetic link to these cytochromes produce variants as to whether there will be slow, normal, or fast processing metabolism. One of these cytochromes is CYP2D6, which metabolizes many of the antipsychotic drugs, and this polymorphism is also related to schizophrenic phenotypes. Slow metabolizers of the variant may find issues concerning toxicity when taking psychedelic drugs, as many of the tryptophan drugs are metabolized by the CYP2D6 enzyme. Although there is no definitive research on DMT, there is research that discusses this variant metabolism with regards to 5-methoxy-DMT, which is chemically connected to DMT. So you can see that this P450 cytochrome may be important for pulling the whole picture together. Interestingly, there is a paper that pulls together metabolism, diet, and bacteria relating to the P450 cytochromes, but also suggests a connection to responding to infection. This is interesting to me, as I would hypothesize that toxicity via dietary influence would affect these cytochromes. Other research from Colmer, although unpublished, suggests that both P450 enzymes and DMT have a role in cell survival mechanisms, which would make sense if DMT was noted as being involved in cell survival. So moving on to the tryptophan pathway now. We know that approximately 95% of the tryptophan pathway is connected to the kynurenine pathway, and that tryptophan can only be acquired via diet. As you can see, DMT is converted from tryptamine, which is part of the tryptophan pathway. I'm not going to say anything about serotonin, as there's so much information available on this concerning health issues that I wanted to address other areas that are less researched. Again, looking at the link between serotonin and melatonin, melatonin is connected to sleep, which is interesting, as when we get sick, we tend to sleep more, and I would hypothesize, in my case, that this would give my body time to process toxicity caused by dietary influences. So focusing now on the tryptamine aspect of the pathway. So the research by Dean suggests that endogenous DMT may be produced from tryptamine by the INMT enzyme. Indolylthylamine N-methyltransferase is suggested again to be impacted via genes and biological pathways. Interestingly, on my Facebook forum, Biological Aspects of Psychedelics, Sam Keating mentions tracking down INMT producing bacteria that can produce DMT. So although there is hardly any studies carried out on this discussion, further research could be performed in this area to clarify the connection. In discussions with Sam, we were toying with the idea that DMT hallucinations were actually created by bacteria, something like the toxoplasmosis parasite that can create altered states of consciousness in people. Personally, I think that this is a possibility and would be linked to gut and brain bacteria that I will briefly cover later. So moving on to the DMT area of this pathway. I can't say much about DMT as an isolated endogenous chemical because this presentation is to integrate the bigger picture as a whole. What research keeps mentioning is that DMT is produced when the cells are under stress, and that DMT protects brain and immune cells when under stress, which would make sense if the cells were under oxidative stress through unbalanced pathways leading to this. There are some really early hypotheses connected to schizophrenia phenotypes, and these are the transmethylation and the one carbon cycle hypotheses. And although I've not thoroughly researched these hypotheses, I am finding that any historical research on endogenous DMT may be invaluable in solving the problem by integrating new information from current research. So the kyurenin pathway. Interestingly, this pathway is disrupted in Hartnupp's disease, which is a defect in vitamin B3 or niacin metabolism. This can also cause psychosis. This may suggest that the deficiency in this pathway is a factor in hallucinations or altered reality. We know that the chemical neopterin is raised and tetrahydrobiopterin is lowered in many diseases. Neopterin can be measured as a parallel to indolemin 2,3 oxygenase or IDO1. This is an enzyme that forms the kyurenin pathway from the tryptophan pathway. IDO1 can be used as a measure of the tryptophan and kyurenin pathways. Melatonin also promotes the indolemin oxygenase activity, which has been found to be connected to the neopterin chemical activated in illness. Tryptophan dioxygenase, or TDO, keeps these pathways in check and is also produced in the liver. Therefore, there could well be a link here between the liver enzymes and the balance of the tryptophan kyurenin pathway. We know that 3-hydroxykyurenin is a neurotoxic chemical. It is one of the main pathways alongside the neuroprotective kyurenic acid involved with astrocytes and inhibition of AMPA receptors and NMDA receptors. The other pathway, anthralilic acid, can bypass the neurotoxic 3-hydroxykyurenin and go straight to 3-hydroxyanthralic acid. The red boxes show the areas that are neurotoxic and excitotoxic, with the extension of xanthranic acid, which I will cover later. So the kyurenin pathway can produce toxicity when not in balance. This will produce oxidative stress, which will result in immune activation, causing inflammation. Out of interest, there is some research that has covered the immune system in relation to endogenous DMT. And although this research is related to autism, this is something that is present in my family. So moving on, just to explain another little area that has stimulated my interest. 3-hydroxykyurenin, the neurotoxic chemical, can transform into xanthranic acid, which inhibits sepiapterin. Without falling into a technical rabbit hole, sepiapterin is also connected to various illnesses. Although I don't believe it to be directly linked to DMT, sepiapterin has been found to have dietary influences, especially connected to diabetes and therefore insulin. The control of tetrahydrobiopterin is a co-founder for the monooxygenases and will, according to my understanding, affect the kyurenin pathway if not in balance, resulting in a buildup of exotoxic quinolinic acid and the inhibition of NAD+, which is required for chemical reactions relating to cell function. So back to the kyurenin pathway, just to explain a bit more about quinolinic acid. Quinolinic acid is an NMDA agonist and regulates gluconeurogenesis. This is interesting as insulin and glucose interaction keep rearing their heads in my research on endogenous DMT. It would be interesting to monitor any levels of this while under the influence of exogenous DMT, either pure injection or ayahuasca, to see if there is any evidence to support this hypothesis. Other research by Hayes investigated the correlation between insulin and quinolinic acid, finding connections between them. Interestingly, insulin psychosis, diabetes, and P450 variants have been pulled together by Bahara. Remember, these are liver enzymes that control metabolism. They may also be controlled genetically, but without proper testing, people may be unaware of their metabolism system, which may be creating problems by a slow processing of substances such as glucose, etc., resulting in what is known as mental health issues, even though there is a biological reason for them. So again, I found out about diet through personal experience. It turns out I was poisoning myself eating fruit and vegetables and any other high carb contents such as pulses, rice and pasta, which all turn to a form of sugar when processed. Although I wasn't diabetic, there was something upstream, as it were, that was affecting my glucose processing. The ketogenic diet includes high fat, stimulating fatty acids. There has been some research showing changes to the tryptophan and kyurenin levels from the ketogenic diet. This research was in relation to epilepsy, and I understand that epilepsy is closely related to migraines. And interestingly, the Epilepsy Foundation says that epilepsy can also present as psychosis. So moving on now to my final area of the bigger picture, bacteria. Some of you may have come across the research that has been done in relation to health issues and gut bacteria. Again, due to my personal experience, I have been eager to find out about specific bacteria that is influenced by a diet. Although this is early days for this type of research, animal studies have shown that the ketogenic diet does produce specific bacteria, and that one of the specific bacteria does help with metabolism. So rounding it up, as you can see, it's quite difficult to pin down a specific area to focus on without seeing a bigger picture. And I think this could be why linking endogenous DMT to hallucinations or altered states has been elusive. I'm not negating previous research, I'm just hoping to expand on it. Although this has been a brief introduction to the possibility of the pathways and metabolisms involved with endogenous DMT, I am aware that there are other endogenous brain chemicals such as 5-methoxy and hydroxy DMT, which may also have an influence. Personally, I believe that there is some substance to the hypothesis that endogenous DMT does create hallucinations in many of the health issues, mainly because research from pioneers such as Dean and Bourgenin support the hypothesis of increased DMT in animal brains under stress, and that pharmaceutical companies such as Pharmadrug would not be interested in these endogenous DMT researchers if there was nothing to it. So that's me done. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.